Previously, we talked about classical conditioning, where you have a response, or you're getting an animal or a person to respond by conditioning them to associate something that you want them to associate with something that they naturally wouldn't. So, we talk about Pavlov's dog. Their unconditioned response is they salivate when they see food. Well, Pavlov noticed when he walked in the room that the dog started salivating even though he didn't have food. So he coincidentally conditioned them to respond to salivate because he was feeding them. Then he started playing with the food, and a bell was actually a metronome, and he played it. And what happened is when he took away the food and he played the metronome, the dogs started to salivate still. They had their unconditioned response. And he had classically conditioned them to respond to something that originally would not cause that response at all. Like a metronome doesn't cause people to salivate and get hungry, but he had forced it. Then we talk about before that, and we looked at in the back, we looked at little Albert and Watson did it with human beings. And he said, look, I could do this with people. And he did do it with people. And what happened is people start raising questions about if that was ethical or not. We can see the pictures where he was scared. And actually, what we find out just naturally what happens is that sometimes we have classical conditioning not on purpose, but we have conditioning that happens just through the nature of kids learning. So probably the biggest example of that would be I could think of is if you have any siblings or when you guys have your own kids, if you take your brother or sister or cousin or nephew to a doctor, you'll quickly learn that the doctors understand classical conditioning. So the one thing that kids don't really like is shots. Well, kids have to get their vaccinations. And you get most of your vaccinations when you're a child. They're usually done before you go to elementary school so that when you're in school, you're vaccinated already and you won't get sick from spreading diseases. Well, you'll notice that doctors almost never give vaccinations to children. The reason is, like my son, for example, when we go see his doctor, he loves his doctor. He's such a nice guy and he has no fear or he's not concerned to see his doctor. He's a good guy. But as soon as the doctor leaves, the doctor will have a nurse come in to give him the shot. And my son does know. He goes, what are you doing? As soon as he sees the nurse, he's like, what are you doing? What's going on? And then he starts thinking, am I going to get a shot? Because he's had them before. And he gets nervous because now he's figured it out that the nurse gives him the shot. So he doesn't get upset when he sees the doctor. He gets upset when he sees the nurse. And in the past, we used to have doctors give him the shot. And we noticed that kids would freak out as soon as they saw the doctor. So doctors and pediatricians don't want kids to be scared of them. So they never give vaccinations or shots. They have the nurse or somebody else be the bad guy, quote unquote. Now, Edward Thorndike is going to teach us about a different type of behavioralism. He's going to teach us about operative conditioning. So Edward Thorndike came up with this idea of what's called the law of effect. So in the law of effect, he states that any behavior that is followed by pleasant consequences is likely to be repeated. And any behavior followed by unpleasant consequences is likely to stop or be extinguished. So what he does is he's going to create experiments and test this out. So he starts to getting these ideas of what we call today reward and punishment. So the idea is if you reward somebody or something, like an animal, and give them a treat, they're much more likely to repeat the behavior. That's why dogs can be very treat motivated. Not all dogs, though. So like we used to have it was a retriever lab mix, and he had some border collies, very treat motivated. If I gave my dog a treat, he would do it. He loved treats. Not all dogs are like that, though. They don't work like that. Now, and if we punish and they associate something like getting spanked or your food taken away, then they're less likely to and more likely to stop the behavior. So what he created is called the puzzle box. And operative conditioning involves learning from the consequences of our behavior. And he applies this to animals, not humans. So he starts with a cat, and with this puzzle box, and you can see the model above. And this is not exactly what it looked like. It actually looked more like this wooden box with like a door, and it's a little contraption where the cat can pull the lever and open the door. And he actually took data. You see the data? and he would actually graph data to see how often and how fast they would pull it. But this image is better. There's a better model you can see through. So there's a cat. There's this little ball on a string, and if they pull the string, the door will open and they'll get the cat food. So that's a reward. And the cat quickly learned this. Now the cat at first, the cats would try all different types. They stick their head through the bars and stuff. They would try all different ways to get to the cat food. But they quickly learned that through trial and error, that when they did this, they pulled on the string, the door would open, they could go get the cat food. And under Thorndike's puzzle box, and remember, this is in 1898, so this is over 100 years ago, they could escape and eat the food, pull the lever, and once a cat learned they pulled the lever, they repeated the behavior. So he had data and evidence to support his hypothesis that if we created environmental changes and that if animals learned to do those changes and they get their reward, they would continue the behavior. And he was correct. So then it gets complicated on whether that happens with human beings, and you can see that a lot of education, prisons have really used behaviorism and these ideas, and there's some issues with behaviorism today. Let's watch this video.
But how is a new skill learned? That was a question which began to fascinate Thorndike. To answer it, he built some ingenious puzzle boxes from which cats could only escape by operating latches.
And then you go.
The cat appears to be very clever in engineering its escape, solving the problem with a deftly placed paw and a push of its nose. But Thorndike didn't believe that an animal, even a clever cat, understands the consequences of its behavior. When he placed a cat in the puzzle box for the first time, Thorndike was unable to see any evidence of flashes of insight. The successful actions appeared first by chance. He proved that the apparent cleverness arose by trial and error, and used graphs to measure the rate of learning. A well-practiced cat quickly recalls the actions that help it escape to its reward of food. If an action brings a reward, Thorndike believed that that action becomes stamped into the mind. In his thesis, he explained further his ideas about learning, that behavior changes because of its consequences. He called this his law of effect, which explained how even wild creatures develop new habits.
Now, so some of the issues with behaviorism, as we do learn, is it kind of plateaus. So in the 1960s, it kind of ends because once you learn about reward and punishment and you have reinforcers and you could take things away, and your parents might do some behaviorism on you. Like if you talk on your phone or your grades are going down, they might take your phone away. However, if you get an A in class, they might pay you or give you money, like $50 so you can buy something. And that's behaviorism. However, what happens is once you get to the point where we know like about reinforcers and negative reinforcers and positive reinforcers, giving stuff and taking stuff away, how far can you go with this? And the other issue with behaviorism, if we actually found out, it starts going the other way. That at some point, animals will actually start turning against us and stop doing it. And human beings that this works for, they start manipulating or playing games with it, and it's not necessarily a very healthy approach. So you think of like the prison system is very much based on behaviorism. While this punishment and reward systems are okay for a minute, but does it really change the behavior? And the answer is probably not. And that's why we've seen, even like in our school district, we don't do behaviorism anymore. We do what's called, restorative justice, because the kids that behaviorism would work for are probably kids that are pretty good anyway. So if you have a hardworking student who's like a B or an A student, they're going to work hard. They're motivated internally, and grades might be some of the external positive reward or negative consequences if they get a low grade. However, they already have the motivation. Now, if you have a kid that's always getting in trouble or feels bad or mistreated, it doesn't help to keep punishing them. It could actually have a negative effect. So the reverse effect, it could actually make them lash out, or they're more likely to participate in negative behavior because there's no incentive, there's no reason, they're giving up, they're shutting down. So what you guys are going to do in class is we're actually going to see how powerful behaviorism when it comes to language. So there's a very famous linguisticist, his name is Noam Chomsky, and he comes up with this theory that language is actually shaping your behavior, that you can't think outside of your language. And he actually says that, look, the words and the way we say things can actually affect the way we see the world. So, for example, in Italy, in Latin languages, the love languages like French, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, and Spanish, there's a lot of words for love. There's a lot of synonyms. In English, however, there's only one word for love. There's different types of love, parental love, or love between a husband and a wife, love for your boyfriend or girlfriend, or your fiance, love for your friend. However, the actual emphasis of love, so much in the Italian language, for example, he believes can actually prioritize and shape your behavior to believe that love is really important. And the de-emphasis on love in the American or in the American culture and English culture and the English language could have the reverse effect. We're less likely to maybe be affectionate or loving. And his theory is considered groundbreaking and is still revered today. So we're going to try this survey that was made by Harvard to see if, without knowing your name, how old you are, where you're from, if they could tell where you're from, just by answering questions using your language.